may have spelt that wrong in the title, but I want to kind of talk about something that I kind of learned about. Like, I knew they existed, but I didn't realize the activities they were doing and stuff like that. And of one of the dumbest things I have come across, and that's climate activists. Now, don't get me wrong, there is stuff that we need to do, and that, society is striving to actually get better when it comes to this whole thing of, climate change and, you know, greenhouse gases and global warming and all this different stuff, right? And um, it's interesting though because of how the car hobby is being attacked with this, but even these climate activists of what they're doing, it's a little interesting because I've seen multiple videos today of this just stop oil doing stuff of where basically protesters are going out on like crickets and football pitches and they're throwing around a bunch of orange paint. They're disrupting a bunch of people's lives. They're blocking major highways and streets in the UK, especially. I've heard of some stuff happening here in Canada as well. And to be honest, it's interesting, especially when it comes to the people that um, are blocking a public road. Because if you know anything about the internal combustion engine, you will know that if it's actually at idle, it's actually burning more fuel than if it was actually running and driving down the road. That's just a common. That's just well known, because like when your car is just at idle or just barely moving, the one thing is it's burning the most amount of fuel without actually going anywhere, right? And that's a problem. So you're actually using more emissions in the end, and you're still going to use those other emissions later when you actually get moving again. So really, they're not really making a difference with this climate activist shit. And to be honest, I've always been an advocate of this and talk about it. There's this thing with, oh, we need to get rid of the internal combustion engine, and well, I understand where that thinking comes from, and I understand that the internal combustion engine is not the way of the future. That's fine. However, though, there is something to be said, though, about this whole battery electric thing, though, and how bad it really is. Now, they're making strides to make it better, but especially the strip mining and of for the lithium, right, for the batteries and the cobalt, right, for the batteries. Because strip mining is a very archaic way of getting minerals out of the ground. And while I did hear of something that they're going to do something similar to like fracking to somehow get it out, but that makes no sense because you're mining a mineral, right? Where fracking, it's a little different because when you frack for oil, it works with pressurized water and it brings it up that way, right? It's a very simple concept, but that doesn't even make sense of how you could actually get a mineral up as opposed to a liquid that way. But regardless, they're trying to make strides, trying to make it better, and it's just one of those things that I really, really don't like. Because I mean, don't get me wrong, if you like electric cars, that's fine. To be honest, I am not bashing or hating on you, as long as you actually understand the fundamentals about it. Because also because of the processing of like and how that strip mining works, and also with the big mining trucks and everything that has to haul the stuff out, and then the process of even getting the batteries made. Basically, so there's a lot of the mining for lithium and cobalt actually happens here in Canada, but there are other countries as well, but I'm just using Canada as an example. So in Canada, right, it gets mined, okay? But then that resource there, while they are starting to do some refining here in North America and even South America, um, a lot of the refining of that actually happens in Japan. So, okay, say it's, mines. I don't know where the lithium mines are in Canada, but let's just say it's on the west coast, somewhere in BC, right? Because I don't know exactly where they are. But, so BC, okay. Well, it has to cross an entire ocean afterwards to get processed in Japan. And then, once it's processed, then it gets sent out to all these different other factories to put into their vehicles and whatever else. And it's honestly just kind of a messy process, right? But the answer, to be honest, of this stuff, because while I understand the internal combustion engine is not the way of the future, but a hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle, that is a way forward. And now, granted, we are still going to have emissions in the process of making vehicles. 100%, because you still have to, mine for the steel or aluminum, and, with the computers and everything, and the factories, and blah, blah, blah. But we can drastically reduce that by not doing the batteries. And now, granted, we will never, ever get rid of batteries in its entirety. That's just not possible. Because even fun fact, like an electric car like a Tesla, they have all those batteries that are like underneath the car, basically, right? And there's hundreds of them, of these lithium batteries. But what's considered the frunk, I suppose, in every Tesla, there actually is a regular 12-volt battery in there. And that 12-volt battery is running your systems inside the vehicle. And also that's like to unlock the vehicle and to put it into gear and stuff like that. It's that battery there. The lithium batteries underneath are not what does it. And what's interesting, there's kind of a fatal flaw with Teslas. And the fact that when you actually have it charging and say you're not using it for a while, well, that 12-volt battery is actually running all the stuff. Plus, modern vehicles actually have these updates on the fly and stuff, and I don't really agree with that. Why can't you just produce a vehicle and make it perfect the first time? Doesn't mean that, like, my good old gas guzzlers are too much better in that regard, because, the recalls and everything that you hear all the time on vehicles. But, and there's always cost-cutting measures, and of course, I'm sure there is in Teslas, too. You look at how they're kind of put together. They're not exactly the best-made vehicles on the world. They're fast as hell. And for the most part, they look pretty okay, in my opinion. But it's just one of those interesting things. So, and apparently, and I learned this actually from a video from James May on a Tesla. And when you have it plugged in, right? And you're charging the batteries. Well, it's not charging a 12-volt battery up front. Like, once the batteries are fully charged, it just kind of cuts power to it, but it still is plugged in, right? And if it needs a little bit of juice, it'll give it a little bit of juice. But it's not connected to that 12-volt battery up front. So with a 12-volt battery doing these live updates and stuff overnight and whatever, it can actually kill batteries. And actually, some consumers have actually mentioned that and have said that, oh, we've gone out to our Tesla and it's actually dead in the morning, which, that's a problem. And also, like, it is interesting because they actually say that for you to actually, or for an electric vehicle to meet the emissions and eventually, like, get better than the emissions of a regular, brand new internal combustion engine vehicle gets, it actually has to travel over 100,000 kilometers, and depending on the vehicle, sometimes as high as 200,000 kilometers. It varies on vehicle to vehicle, due to just how polluting they actually are in the process of building it, right? And it's wild to me that way, because, like, these electric vehicles, what's interesting is, so with the batteries, right, and how long they actually last. Which, I've heard of a lot of failures in electric cars, especially like Teslas and stuff like that, with their batteries and their battery packs going at just over 100,000 miles, which is 160,000 kilometers. And, I've seen more, I've seen less, and whatever else. And there's always going to be, variations in the fact because it is a man made substance. Or, well, not, lithium's not man made, but you know what I mean? The batteries are, right? And there's always going to be deficiencies because of that. No matter what, even in a factory, there's always some kind of deficiency in building a vehicle, no matter what. And so it's just, ugh, these climate activists, like, clamoring about this, but yet they're not actually fighting the proper fight because they're saying stop oil. Well, the problem is we can't ever stop oil because, well, we use oil for everything, you know? Uh, Fun fact, anybody with a smartphone, well, guess what? This was made with oil, 100%. You know, let's just take this plastic cover off here, right? This crappy little plastic cover that's actually broken on the corner, you can see it there. This is my old phone. This is a Huawei P20 phone, which is built in China. And it's a Chinese company even. The thing is, plastic in its entity is is made from oil, right? So, okay, so you got that, right? And you have all this other stuff, like these single-use plastics, which I find really ironic that, these single-use plastics, well, we're getting rid of those, but yet not all of them, because like here in Canada, it's interesting. I'm just trying to think of something that I could use that's in my vicinity, which I don't think I have anything of. Actually, no, wait, this works. So I have this McDonald's cup here, right? And the one thing is, so, okay, we have to get rid of single-use plastics, so we have to get rid of the plastic straws, alright? Well, we did that. But there's still a bunch of single-use plastic here. Huh. Okay. And then also, like, with paper and how that works and everything. Now it's interesting because there actually is conservation efforts when it comes to trees, of course. And it's interesting because when they do clear cutting, they actually do replant trees. People don't realize that, at least here in Canada, they do. Because they understand that, well, we can't just clear cut and then be like, oh, crap, in 40, in like 100 years, have no trees left. It doesn't work that way. And something that's interesting, to be honest, and I'm curious of how this is going to affect plant growth. And I've talked about this as well. So, when the internal combustion engine, if they ever, I don't think they'll ever outlaw it, to be honest, but, if it ever just becomes non-viable to use anymore, say gas stations are quite scarce and stuff like that, it won't be in my lifetime for sure, but say that all happens. Well, the one interesting thing is that everybody talks about the CO2 emissions that come out of the tailpipe of a vehicle. What's interesting about the CO2 emissions is, well, CO2 in and of itself is actually not a harmful substance when it comes to plant life. Because if we know anything about the whole photosynthesis thing with plants, they actually take in carbon dioxide and then feed out oxygen, right? That's where we get oxygen from, is plants. There's, of course, natural oxygen in the air, and it's majority of the air is actually made up of nitrogen. And the one thing is, because plant growth, actually, if you feed it carbon dioxide, your plants will grow a lot better than just normal, right? And it's interesting, actually, and I do remember years ago on Top Gear that they talked about, or didn't just talk about it, they actually did a little experiment of trying to get, it was a Jag XK, I think it was? Maybe XKR, I can't remember. But they actually made it do zero emissions. Now, this is not a practical way to do it, but it worked. They basically made a greenhouse trailer to be pulled in behind the Jag. And one thing is, oh, sorry, I did not see your comment there. For some reason, it did not pop up. So, well, it's interesting actually that comment that says man-made climate change is fake. Well, it's interesting because climate change in itself, it's not exactly a man-made concept at all, or construct. It's not. But we have affected how the temperatures have been, but the world in and of itself has cycles. We can look in time for that. Look back in time for the natural cycles of the world. Because, yes, in the past, the world has gotten really hot and then it gets really cold. You know, it gets the ice ages. We've had a few of those in Earth's history. The biggest ice age was, of course, after the asteroid hit the planet and, you know, wiped out a majority of the dinosaurs. But that's not, you know, and the reason why it started an ice age is because when that happened, it put all this soot into the air, right? And it basically blocked out the sun. So that's why, like, a lot of the dinosaurs, like, yeah, a lot of the dinosaurs would have been vaporized by the blast of it, but the sheer cold from the soot in the air is what killed off actually the majority of the dinosaurs. The asteroid itself, while it killed a lot, wasn't as many as you think. So that's a little interesting. But getting back to, sorry, I got sidetracked there. So getting back to what I was mentioning before, is when it like that Top Gear sort of experiment that they did. It's interesting. Like I said, it was a Jag XK, and they actually did a greenhouse trailer in behind it. Put a bunch of plants in it, and actually they routed the exhaust through that, and it was coming out as zero emissions out. You know, they put a little tailpipe on the trailer, and it was zero emissions. Which, that's pretty wild, you know, to think about that. Now, that's not practical to do at all, obviously. You know, we can't all have trailers going all over the place in behind our vehicles and make them zero emissions that way. But it's interesting because, you know, hydrogen, while it's not just a use in fuel cells for a electric motor, you can also convert internal combustion engine vehicle to hydrogen. If there was if we had the infrastructure here in place in Alberta to actually get it and it be available, you know, everywhere, I would convert my car to hydrogen in a heartbeat, to be honest. And it's something that the technology's been around for a long time to do that. There was actually there was a thing in the 80s. There was a Chevy Caprice that was converted to hydrogen. And they talked about it then, you know, that was in the 80s, you know. Imagine with the processes that we have now of actually making a hydrogen-powered internal combustion engine vehicle, right? It would be much better than what they had then. And because you can still actually gain the power and everything. Of course, people always worry about, well, hydrogen, they think immediately, they'll think of the Hindenburg. But what's interesting about the Hindenburg is when that actually burnt down, it wasn't the hydrogen that caused the problems with that. Although, while it helped with ignition, don't get me wrong, it wasn't the main source of that. What was the main source of the Hindenburg going down was the thermite that was used for coating the entire Zeppelin, right? So that's what gave, like, the thermite is what gave it that sort of silvery look to it. They used it for, I think it was insulating properties, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a highly flammable source, and there was a fire that happened within it, and it burned up very quickly. Like the entire thing burned up in just, I think it was like 10 minutes or something. It was just wild, and but it was the thermite. It wasn't the hydrogen. Hydrogen wasn't the problem, right? But that's what everybody thinks of, because they use the hydrogen to make it actually float. And like hydrogen is very light, to be honest. And of course, there's everybody, like they're not everybody I should say, but people have been worried about, oh, with hydrogen fuel cells. Well, what happens if that is punctured or crushed? And obviously, people will think about hydrogen bombs, but that's a little different because you're that's extreme sources of that. But what's interesting is when you actually puncture a hydrogen unit, all that happens, as long as there's no ignition source, because, while hydrogen is flammable, it's actually less flammable than gasoline is, to be honest. But hydrogen, when there's a puncture that happens in it, all of that that hydrogen just rapidly comes out. It's similar to propane in that aspect, but with propane, if there's a spark, like it's like instantly lights up and just blows up. But hydrogen, it doesn't really work that way, right? And actually, hydrogen is quite safe. The storage of hydrogen has always been an interesting one because of, it's literally a gas. Because what we call gasoline, it's interesting because it's not actually the proper term. Petroleum is the proper term for gas. And the thing is, because, petroleum is the liquid, right? But cars, in essence, they don't necessarily run off of the liquid of it. They run off of the vapors. And the vapors are what actually catches on fire, right? It's not actually the liquid itself. The liquid is essentially a product. And that's why it's interesting, actually, because something I could do to my car, and I've been curious about doing this, I just never have. And I've looked into it, but it's something I've never done, is converting it to a gas vapor car. And I'd be interested to do that to see, are the claims true? Does it actually get way better fuel economy if you do that? Because a lot of people have done it on a smaller scale, and like people used to do it back in the day. There used to be kits that you could buy. Now it's actually apparently not that difficult. You just need to get your pressures correct, and basically you need to control how much gas actually goes in. Right? It's quite wild, to be honest. And it's something that was kind of a pioneering thing through the 70s. There was 60s and 70s, to be honest. And even automakers played with the concept, but I think the big oil and gas kind of just kiboshed that whole thing and just gave them too much money and be like, hey, just get rid of that, shall we? For that to, be gone. Because there are stories, of course, that you hear about gas vapor carburetors that actually go back to like the 60s and 70s, of where somebody would get a test mule instead of the vehicle that they actually wanted, instead of the vehicle that they ordered or something like that. And just especially back then, a lot more common for that to happen. And I don't get it, because like you'd think that they would pay attention to that more, but that's fine. These prototype vehicles. And what's interesting is like these big block vehicles, that usually got into the potentially even single digits for fuel economy and miles per gallon, but they were getting 30, 40, 50 miles to the gallon with these systems, or at least that was the claim. And you wonder how true that was. But it's one of those things, and I've been curious to do it. I've just never have. And, I've watched some videos, and I'd have to actually brush up on my knowledge again of it by watching some of those videos and reading up on it again of how exactly that properly works. And if I could do that, because the one thing is, I could vastly improve fuel economy in my car by doing that. Like, my car right now, it's not running the best, and to be honest, I think it's the carburetor. I might actually go to. It's something that I didn't think I was gonna do, but I think I am now. I'd have to go buy some carb jets, but that's fine. They're Holley-sized jets. That shouldn't be an issue. Uh, for my Holley carburetor, actually, um, because yeah, I don't know. There's just something up with my motorcraft at the moment. I don't know what exactly it is. It's just not running 100%. And I can't tune it out. Where the Holley, I'd be able to tune a little better. It just the motorcrafts are designed to where you set it and they're good, you know. And there's not a ton you can do outside of that. If there's a problem, like well, you can richen up the mixture and stuff like that, and set the idle higher. That's you're basically just about all you can do with the motorcraft carburetor. Um, and don't get me wrong, like doing the float setting as an example, you have to take the carburetor apart to do that. Where in a Holley, you don't have to. There's a little set screw on top, and that's how you set your choke. It's a pretty good system, to be honest with the Holleys. I like it. Now, of course, with the float bowls, or not the float bowls, but um, well, I guess actually, yeah, the float bowls, how they are on a Holley carburetor, like they say, oh, Holley carbs leak because of, the fuel eventually will eat away at the gaskets and stuff like that, but just replace your gaskets. It's not that hard, if it does happen, right? And I do have, like, this old, it's a 267 CFM, 267, 287, something like that, CFM, 2-barrel Holley carburetor off of a Jeep, actually. Or not Jeep, AMC. And it may have actually been off the Jeep, to be honest. I don't know. But it's an AMC carb anyways. And the one thing is with that Holley, it has annular boosters, just like the Motorcraft does. And Holley carbs are supposedly supposed to get, better power. I've been curious about that, but also, like, something I heard is my carburetor might be one of those really rare carburetors, which it is rare in the fact that it has Holley jets in it versus having Motorcraft jets. Because Ford pioneered that whole thing. I'm like, why would you do that? Like, it's just so much easier to just go through Holley and have the jets that way instead of making your own and then supplying them and not actually servicing them later on because they didn't, right? That was the problem. But it's one of those things, and to be honest, it is interesting, because and that's something that I think I'm gonna do, to be honest, with my car. Whenever I'm up in Edmonton next, if it's not in my convertible, because I might be driving my convertible to Edmonton soon-ish, we'll see. And we're just going to convert it back to probably a 2-barrel setup, or maybe even a 4-barrel setup, but get rid of all the expensive stuff on mine. And to be honest, I want to keep the MSD, but I want to put the MSD in my my 81 just to see how much better it is. To see what kind of a difference it'll make with the inline 6. I know it's not going to be massive, I understand that, but down low with an MSD box, because MSD boxes are designed to have increased spark at 3,000 RPM or under, right? Above that, it doesn't do it anymore, and it's just a way that it increases like torque and stuff like that and down low power. But up high, yeah, an MSD box doesn't really do anything different than a stock ignition box does. So that's something that would be interesting to see. And the one thing is, I could test on the dyno, because I have free access to the dyno, of, what does it do, right? How much better is it? All that stuff. So, yeah. And that's the one thing. And if you actually want to get your car to be more efficient and actually have better emissions, there's a reason why a lot of manufacturers now are going towards turbos, because turbos not only give you free power, literally a turbo is free power because it's taking waste in the exhaust, just exhaust gases, which literally they go out your tailpipe and they're just a waste anyways, and they go through the turbine of the turbo, and it spools it up and compresses it and throws it straight back into the motor to give it extra air, and it's just extra power, right? And because you're recycling some of those emissions or some of that exhaust, actually, is you're actually increasing fuel economy. So, and you're also, well, I mean, you can increase fuel economy doing that, but actually, what I meant to say is you're actually decreasing emissions, right? So, it is a little interesting of how turbos work that way. And to be honest, I think the Holly would lend itself better for turbocharging applications as opposed to the motorcraft that I have. Now, I could find a early turbo setup for like a 2.3 carb turbo setup, but and do it that way. But I don't know. To be honest, like I have methods and ideas of how I want to do this turbo. We'll see. Like I want to do a draw through setup and stuff like that. Because yeah, again, I want to gain power, but I want to gain fuel efficiency, and the emission side of it's a little interesting for me too. Because while I don't care, because my one single car is not like, oh, my one single car is going to ruin the planet. No, it's a collective effort. But even then, vehicle emissions in its entirety is only 3% of the total emissions on the planet. So that's the whole thing, right? And yeah, I'll just end this discussion kind of around that, to be honest, because I'm getting really tired here. It's 1:15 in the morning here, and yeah, I hope you guys found this discussion a little insightful and good, to be honest, because it's something that I enjoy these types of talks. And while I didn't really have any viewers in this, that's okay. And like something, because I'm going to be transforming the car a bit, because if you don't know, my hood scoop flew off, and I need to fix that. But then also, like tomorrow, I'm actually going to paint the area of the hood, or at least I'm going to attempt to, as long as it's not too windy. Attempt to paint the area of the hood that had the hood scoop on it, so at least it looks a little better. Still gonna have the holes in it because I'm not gonna patch those yet. I'm just figuring out what I want to do. But, anyways, hope you guys did enjoy. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one.